Chef Aaron here. Today I'm going to show you how to make a really healthy and delicious pastry crust. This is a crust that's good for pies, empanadas, tarts, and anything you make with this crust is going to leave you with a good feeling in your stomach, not a heavy feeling. So you can make something for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, or you can make desserts. And it's just a really nice all-purpose crust. So I'm starting with 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I prefer to use organic, but just use a good brand. I also use a 1/4 cup of whole wheat and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I do recommend using kosher salt. I never use table salt. I blend up the ingredients with a whisk, and I then add a 1/4 cup of shortening. The shortening I use is really the secret ingredient to this being a healthy crust. When I eat this crust, I really do feel good. So I can have a pie for breakfast that's just basically fresh fruit with some agave in it. And this crust just leaves you feeling great. So the shortening I use is a Nutiva, red palm, and coconut oil shortening. I recommend at least using organic shortening, but I do like this shortening. I've tried a few different ones, and this one leaves me feeling great. Now I'm just blending the shortening into the flour mixture with my fingers. You can use a food processor for this. You can use a pastry knife or a butter knife to cut it in. I really prefer the old school method. Just kind of flick the flour and shortening around. Make sure that you cover each little piece of shortening with flour before you touch it with your fingers so you don't get the shortening on your fingers. And just really lightly touch it. You don't want to get it real warm. And once your mixture looks like crumbs with a few pea-sized lumps in it, but really you just want it to be pretty fully blended, I'm going to add ice water. So I take filtered water, put a few ice cubes in it, and let it sit there while I'm working my dough. And by the time I add it, it's really cold. Now I'm adding a 1/3 cup plus a tablespoon, and that gives me a good consistency dough that's a little on the wet side. But because it's a shortening dough and we're using whole wheat flour, that tends to cut the gluten down, and this crust turns out really nice. It does have some firmness to it, which is good for empanadas and tarts as well. And I'm just really slowly adding the water and gently folding my flour mixture with a spatula. And just being really gentle in this process will keep the gluten from building up, and it'll keep your crust tasting a lot better. After a bit of stirring, it should be pretty well mixed. It'll be shaggy and kind of lumpy, and there might be some dry spots in there. That's okay. Once it's pretty consistently mixed up, just bring it together gently with your hands. There will be some dry bits left over, so just dump it all onto the counter and give it a final mix. And we're actually going to knead this about 3 or 4 times. Just gently knead it with your fingertips. And this will help the dough to be a little more consistent later on when you work with it. It'll make it easier to work with. Once you've kneaded your dough about 3 times, go ahead and just bring it into a ball. At this point, you can just wrap it really tightly in saran wrap and refrigerate it for at least an hour. You're going to want it nice and cold to work with. Alright, my dough is nice and chilled, so I'm just going to flour some wax paper. I'm flouring the top of the dough, and I'm flouring the rolling pin. And I'm just going to roll this dough out slowly, turning it, rolling it in a different direction each time, and just sort of taking my time. I consistently flip it over, flour it, and roll it, and give it a few rolls and flip it again, and just repeat that process until it's about a 1/4 inch thick. I usually use just slightly under a 1/4 inch thick, but you can just kind of gauge by your fingers and your eyes how thick it should be. You may also want to repair the edges. They might be pretty shaggy and torn, so you can just take your fingers and smooth them out. And that's it. At this point, my dough's looking good, and I'm going to show you a couple things I like to make. I take a Tupperware to cut out some discs. I then add some leftover pot roast or some chicken or fruits, and you basically just don't want to overfill it. You put a little bit of filling in the center, wipe some water around the edge, and then you just close it up and pinch it together. It does take some practice, but if they leak in the oven, they still taste great. One little trick I found is that if you bring it together first and then come back around and give it a tight pinch, they'll stay together better. Now, another one of my favorite things to do is take a muffin pan, and I use a small mason lid jar to cut out the discs. They're just about the right size, and I just put it in the muffin pan and make a little cup. And you can fill this cup with, again, leftover pot roast or chicken. You can make little pot pies, or just fill it with fresh fruit. Put about a teaspoon of agave on top. Just squirt a little bit of agave on top, maybe some cinnamon, and let that bake for 20 minutes. It turns out delicious. So my latest favorite is taking light coconut milk, filling the pastry about 3/4 of the way up, sprinkle some sugar on top, and bake it for 20 minutes at 350. You won't believe how good it is. It's the most basic coconut cream pie, and it's great. For a pina colada twist, take some fresh pineapple and put that in there as well. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful. We all know we're going to eat pie, so why not make it healthy?